I was dead for 7 minutes. Not almost dead. Not near death. Dead. No heartbeat. No brain activity. The kind of dead where the crash cart comes out and the attending physician starts making those grim calculations about when to call it. And in those 7 minutes, I saw something that a lifetime of medical training told me was impossible. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm a trauma surgeon, and I used to be an atheist. Let me be clear about something from the start. I didn't want to believe what happened to me. I spent weeks after trying to explain it away to fit it into the neat scientific boxes I'd built my entire life around. Oxygen deprivation, brain chemistry, hallucination, anything but what it actually was. But I can't lie anymore. Not to myself, not to you. What I experienced in those 7 minutes changed everything. It shattered every certainty I had. And if you told me 2 years ago that I'd be standing here telling this story using words like faith and God without irony, I would have laughed in your face. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who I was before that operating room. You need to know about the woman who was so sure that death was just the end of electrical impulses, that consciousness was nothing more than chemistry, that anyone who believed otherwise was deluding themselves. That woman was me. And she was so wrong. I grew up in San Francisco in a household where science was religion. My father taught philosophy at Berkeley, the kind of philosophy that picked apart faith with surgical precision. My mother was a research biologist at UCSF who spoke about evolution and genetics the way some people speak about miracles. Sunday mornings in our house meant NPR, strong coffee, and the New York Times. Not church. Never church. When I was 8 years old, I asked my father if God was real. I remember the moment clearly. We were at the breakfast table, and I just heard a classmate talk about going to Sunday school. Dad set down his coffee, looked at me with those serious professor eyes, and said, "Sarah, some people find that idea comforting. But we believe in what we can see, what we can test, what we can prove. We believe in evidence." I loved that answer. It made me feel sophisticated. Special. Like I was in on a secret that other people were too weak or too scared to accept. Looking back now, I can see how that single conversation shaped everything, how it built a wall around my heart that would take dying to break down. I was the kid who won every science fair, full ride to Stanford, top of my class at medical school. I chose trauma surgery because I wanted to be at the absolute edge, the place where life and death collided, where science pushed back against the inevitable. And I was good at it. Really good. By 35, I was one of the youngest attending surgeons at Presbyterian Hospital in downtown Chicago. I had the corner office, the reputation, the kind of career that made my parents proud and my colleagues envious. I'd saved hundreds of lives. I'd held dying hands and watched the light leave people's eyes more times than I could count. And every single time, the same thought. This is it. This is all there is. Lights out. The end. I pitied people who needed to believe otherwise. My colleagues who prayed before surgery, I thought they were foolish. Dr. Martinez, one of the cardiothoracic surgeons, would bow his head in the scrub room before difficult cases. Once I actually said to him, "Prayer doesn't close arteries, Martinez. My hands do." He just smiled, this infuriatingly patient smile, and said, "Maybe both can be true, Sarah." I thought he was an idiot. My personal life was as controlled as my surgical suite. I was married to Marcus, a corporate attorney who shared my worldview. We had a beautiful condo in Lincoln Park, season tickets to the symphony, a carefully planned life with no room for anything as messy and irrational as faith. We were happy. Or at least we were successful, and I thought that was the same thing. Everything was ordered, measured, under control. And then came March 15th, 2023. It started as the most ordinary day. I had a routine appendectomy scheduled for 2 p.m., a 17-year-old kid named Tyler whose appendix had ruptured. His parents were in the waiting room, terrified in that way parents get when their child is going under the knife. I remember putting my hand on his mother's shoulder and saying, with absolute confidence, "I've done this surgery hundreds of times. He's going to be fine." I believed it. I always believed it. I scrubbed in, checked the monitors, Made my first incision. Everything textbook. Everything perfect. I was 20 minutes in when I felt it. A tightness in my chest. A flutter in my heartbeat that wasn't normal. I ignored it. I had a job to do. But then the room started to tilt. My hands, my steady, reliable surgeon's hands, started to shake. "Dr. Chen?" The scrub nurse's voice sounded far away. "Are you okay?" I wasn't okay. My chest felt like it was being crushed. My left arm had gone numb. I looked down at Tyler on the table, at his open abdomen, at the half-finished surgery, and I knew. I was having a heart attack. "Morrison," I said to the resident across from me, my voice tight, "take over, now." I stepped back from the table. The room was spinning. I reached for something to steady myself and missed completely. The last thing I heard was the heart monitor. Not Tyler's, mine. The steady beat becoming erratic, then chaotic, then a long, flat tone, and then there was nothing. I was dead. What happened next is hard to explain. Not because I don't remember. I remember every detail with a clarity that still takes my breath away, but because the language we have for it feels inadequate. I was aware. That's the first thing I need you to understand. I wasn't unconscious. I wasn't dreaming. I was more awake, more alert, more present than I'd ever been in my entire life. But I wasn't in my body anymore. I was above it. I could see myself on the floor of the operating room. Could see Dr. Patel shouting orders, see the nurses running, see Morrison frozen over Tyler's open abdomen, unsure whether to finish the surgery or help save his attending physician. I remember thinking, with this strange detached curiosity, so this is what I look like from the outside. My face was gray. My lips were turning blue. There was blood on my scrubs from where I'd grabbed the instrument tray on my way down. I should have been terrified. I should have been fighting to get back to my body. But I felt peaceful. Completely, utterly at peace. And then I wasn't in the operating room anymore. I was in a hallway. Not a hospital hallway. This was different. The light was different. Warm, golden. It didn't come from any visible source. It just was, like the air itself was luminous. The walls weren't walls exactly. They seemed to shift and breathe, and when I looked at them, I could see... I don't know how to describe this. I could see through them, into them. It was like looking at multiple dimensions at once. I started walking. I didn't decide to walk, I just was walking. And as I moved forward, the peace I'd felt in the operating room intensified. It was like every anxiety I'd ever carried, every stress, every fear, was being peeled away, layer by layer. This isn't real, I thought. This is my brain shutting down. DMT release, oxygen deprivation, chemical hallucination. Even dying, I was trying to explain it away. But then I heard it. A voice. Sarah. Not from outside, from inside, from everywhere and nowhere all at once. I stopped walking. "Sarah, why are you so afraid?" I wanted to say I wasn't afraid, but standing there in that impossible hallway, I realized I'd been afraid my entire life. Afraid of being wrong. Afraid of losing control. Afraid that maybe, just maybe, there was something bigger than my understanding, and if I admitted that, I'd have to give up the certainty I'd built my entire identity around. "I'm not afraid," I said out loud. My voice sounded small. "Yes, you are." The hallway opened up into a space that defied geometry. I was in a room, or a field, or maybe both. The golden light was brighter here, almost tangible, and in the center of it, I can't tell you what I saw exactly. Not because I don't remember, but because there aren't words. The closest I can come is this. I saw love, not an emotion, not a feeling. Love as a person, love as a presence, love as the fundamental force, holding everything together. And that love knew me. Not the version of me I presented to the world, not Dr. Sarah Chen, trauma surgeon, atheist, woman in control. It knew the real me, the terrified 8-year-old who'd asked about God and learned to bury that question, the medical student who'd held her first dying patient and cried in the supply closet, the wife who'd had 3 miscarriages and told herself she didn't want children anyway, the daughter who'd spent 37 years trying to earn her parents' approval through achievement. It knew every lie I'd told myself, every wall I'd built, every time I'd chosen certainty over truth. And it loved me anyway. I fell to my knees. Or maybe I was already on my knees. Space didn't work the same way there. I don't understand, I whispered. This can't be real? Why can't it? The voice was gentle, patient, like Dr. Martinez in the scrub room, but infinitely more so. Because I don't believe in you. And yet here you are. I started crying. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that felt like years of pressure finally releasing. I've been so wrong, I said, about everything? Yes. Not condemning, just true. All those people I watched die, all those times I thought it was just the end. Were you there? Were you there with them? Always. The presence moved closer. Or I moved closer. Or maybe there was no distance to begin with. Sarah, you've spent your whole life trying to save people from death. But you never understood that death is not the end. It's not the enemy. Fear is the enemy. And fear has been running your life since you were 8 years old. It was true. All of it. What do I do now? I asked. You go back? Back? Your time isn't finished. There's still work for you to do. People who need to hear this story. People who are as lost as you were. I don't want to go back, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in my life, I wanted to let go of control. To stay in that presence. To never leave that light. I know, but I'm sending you back anyway. And Sarah? Yes? This time don't try to do it alone. The hallway appeared again, but now it was pulling me backward. The light was fading. The peace was slipping away. Wait, I called out. I don't even know who you are. Yes, you do. And I did. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty. It was Jesus. The same Jesus I'd dismissed as mythology, as wish fulfillment, as a fairy tale for people who couldn't handle reality. He was real. He'd always been real. And then I was being pulled faster, faster, away from the light, back towards something dark and heavy and painful. My body convulsed. That's the first thing I felt when I slammed back into it. Pain, crushing, burning, all-consuming pain radiating from my chest. Like someone had reached into my ribcage and was squeezing my heart with a fist. I gasped. Choked. My eyes flew open. Faces swam above me. Dr. Patel, Nurse Richardson, Morrison, all of them staring down at me with expressions of shock and relief. She's back, someone said. Jesus Christ, she's back. I almost laughed at that. Jesus Christ, indeed. Sarah, can you hear me? Patel's face was close to mine, his hand on my wrist checking my pulse. Don't try to move. We're taking you straight to the cath lab. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw. They'd intubated me. I could feel the tube being pulled out, could taste blood and plastic. Tyler, I managed to croak. Morrison closed, Patel said. The kid's fine. You're the one we almost lost. Almost lost. The words felt absurd. They didn't understand. I wasn't almost lost. I was completely lost. And then I was found. The ceiling tiles passed overhead as they wheeled me through the hallway. The fluorescent lights hurt my eyes after that golden luminescence. Everything here felt harsh, dim, heavy. I wanted to go back. The thought hit me hard. I wanted to die again. Not because I was suicidal, but because what I'd experienced on the other side was more real, more vivid, more true than anything I'd ever known in life. Coming back felt like being shoved into a prison after tasting freedom. They stabilized me in the cath lab. I'd had what they called a widowmaker, a massive blockage in my left anterior descending artery. The fact that I survived it all was, in Dr. Harrison's words, statistically improbable. You were gone for 7 minutes, Sarah, he said later that evening, standing by my bed in the ICU. No heartbeat, no brain activity. We coded you twice. The second time, I was about to call it. What made you keep trying? I asked. My voice was still hoarse. He shrugged. Patel insisted, said he had a feeling. I don't usually listen to feelings, but... He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Anyway, you're here. That's what matters. But I wasn't really here. Part of me was still in that hallway of light, on my knees before that presence that knew me completely and loved me anyway. Marcus arrived an hour later. He burst into my room like a tornado, his tie loosened, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "Sarah, my God, when they called me..." He stopped, took a breath, collected himself. "Are you okay?" "I died," I said. "I know, they told me." "No, Marcus. I died, and I experienced." The word stuck in my throat. How could I explain it to him? To the man who'd stood beside me for 8 years, who shared every one of my certainties, who would think I'd lost my mind if I told him the truth? "It's okay," he said, misunderstanding my hesitation. "You don't have to talk about it. You've been through trauma. Your brain was deprived of oxygen. It's normal to have hallucinations, strange experiences." It wasn't a hallucination. Marcus paused, looked at me carefully. "Sarah, you're a scientist. You know what happens to the brain during cardiac arrest? DMT release, temporal lobe activity." "I know all that," I interrupted. "I know the medical explanations. I spent 15 years explaining away other people's near-death experiences with those same words. But this was different. This was real." What was real? I closed my eyes, saw that golden light again, felt that overwhelming love. "I met Jesus," I whispered. The silence in the room was deafening. When I opened my eyes, Marcus was staring at me like I'd spoken in tongues. "Sarah, you're not making sense. You don't believe in Jesus. We don't believe in..." "I know what we believed," I said. "I know what I believed." But Marcus, I was there. I was somewhere else. And it was more real than this room, more real than this bed, more real than anything I've ever experienced in my entire life. He sat down heavily in the chair beside my bed, ran his hands through his hair. I could see him trying to process, trying to fit what I was saying into his rational worldview. "The doctor said you might be confused for a while," he said finally. "Your brain went through significant trauma. Give it some time. You'll feel more like yourself soon." But that was the problem. I didn't want to feel like myself, not the old myself. That woman was blind. That woman had spent her whole life so confident in her understanding of reality that she'd missed the most fundamental truth of all. God is real. And he loves us with a love so fierce, so complete, that death itself can't stand against it. Over the next 3 days in the ICU, I had a lot of time to think, to doubt, to question whether Marcus was right, whether it was all just brain chemistry and oxygen deprivation. But every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that light. I could feel it. Warm, real, true. And I remembered what Jesus had said. This time, don't try to do it alone. On the 4th day, Dr. Martinez came to visit. He stood in the doorway of my room, holding a small bouquet of flowers, looking uncertain. "Can I come in?" he asked. I nodded. He set the flowers on the bedside table and sat down. We were quiet for a long moment. "I heard what happened," he said finally. "Not just the heart attack. What you've been telling people? About what you saw?" I tensed, waiting for the skepticism, the careful concern, the subtle suggestions that I needed psychiatric evaluation. But Martinez just smiled. That same patient smile I'd found so infuriating in the scrub room. "Tell me," he said. "I want to hear it. All of it." And for the first time since I'd come back, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely crazy. So I told him everything. About the hallway of light. About the presence that knew every secret corner of my soul. About kneeling before love itself and feeling every wall I'd ever built come crashing down. About Jesus sending me back with work left to do. Dr. Martinez listened without interrupting. When I finished, there were tears in his eyes. "Sarah," he said quietly, "do you know how long I've been praying for you?" I stared at him. Praying for me? 5 years, every morning before I scrub in. I've been asking God to reveal himself to you, to break through that brilliant, stubborn, beautiful mind of yours and show you the truth. Something cracked open in my chest. Why? Because I saw myself in you, he said. I used to be just like you. Atheist, arrogant, so sure that science had all the answers. And then my daughter was diagnosed with leukemia when she was 4 years old. I hadn't known that. In 5 years of working alongside this man, I'd never asked about his personal life. The doctors gave her a 30% chance of survival, he continued, and I was a cardiothoracic surgeon standing in a pediatric oncology ward, completely powerless. All my knowledge, all my skill, meant nothing. I couldn't save her. I couldn't even help her. What happened? I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. A hospital chaplain came to visit. I told him to leave. Told him prayer was useless, but he left me a Bible anyway. Said if I changed my mind, start with the book of John. Martinez smiled at the memory. I was so angry. At God, at the universe, at the unfairness of it all. One night, at 2 a.m. in the hospital room while my daughter slept, I opened that Bible just to prove to myself how ridiculous it all was. And I read about a man who wept when his friend died, even though he knew he was about to raise him from the dead. I read about a God who became human and suffered and bled and died, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Because he loved us that much. He paused, looking out the window at the Chicago skyline. My daughter survived. The cancer went into remission. But even if it hadn't, even if I'd lost her, I'd already found something I didn't know I was missing. I found God, or rather, he found me. I was crying now, quiet tears running down my cheeks. What do I do now? I asked. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. Marcus looks at me like I've had a psychotic break. The other surgeons are tiptoeing around me. I heard one of the nurses say I have post-traumatic religious delusion. Martinez reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small book. It was worn, the pages soft from use. Start here, he said, handing it to me. Book of John, just like that chaplain told me. And Sarah, don't try to figure it all out at once. Faith isn't something you solve like a medical puzzle, it's something you live into. After he left, I opened the Bible, the Gospel of John. I'd never read it before, not really. Maybe bits and pieces quoted at weddings or funerals, but never with any real attention. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. I read for hours, through the pain medication fog, through the exhaustion, through the sound of monitors beeping and nurses checking vitals. I read about Jesus turning water into wine, healing the sick, raising the dead. I read about him meeting a woman at a well and telling her everything she'd ever done wrong, not to condemn her, but to free her. I read about him telling his disciples, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I thought, I met him. I actually met him. This isn't a story. This isn't mythology. This is real. But knowing something is real and knowing what to do about it are two different things. Marcus came to take me home a week after the heart attack. The drive was tense. He kept glancing at me like I might start speaking in tongues at any moment. The partners are concerned, he said as we pulled into our building's parking garage. About your state of mind. They're suggesting you take some time off. Maybe see someone. A therapist? A psychiatrist, he corrected gently. Sarah, you're talking about religious experiences. You've never been religious. This is a major personality change. It could be a sign of what? Brain damage? I didn't say that. But you're thinking it? He pulled into our parking spot and turned off the engine. Sat there with his hands on the steering wheel. I don't know what to think, he said finally. The woman I married doesn't believe in God. Doesn't believe in anything she can't measure or test. And now you're reading the Bible and talking about Jesus like he's someone that you know personally. Because I do know him, I said quietly. I met him, Marcus, and I know how that sounds. I know it doesn't fit into our worldview, but it happened. Or your oxygen-deprived brain created an experience that felt real. We'd been having this same argument for a week. I was tired of it. Believe what you want, I said, opening the car door, but I know what I experienced. And I can't unknow it. The first few weeks home were the hardest. I tried to go back to my old routines, reading medical journals, reviewing case files, preparing for my return to surgery. But everything felt different, hollow somehow. I'd spend hours staring at journal articles about cardiac arrest and near-death experiences, reading researchers try to explain away what I'd lived through. Temporal lobe seizures, endorphin release, the brain's response to dying, all reasonable explanations, all completely inadequate to explain what I'd actually experienced. I started going to church. Not the beautiful, historic Presbyterian church my parents had gotten married in. A small community church 3 blocks from our condo that Martinez had recommended. The first Sunday, I sat in the back row and cried through the entire service. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. The pastor's name was Michael. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes and a sermon style that was less performance and more conversation. That first Sunday, he talked about doubt. Faith isn't the absence of questions, he said. It's what you do with them. Thomas doubted. He said he wouldn't believe unless he could put his fingers in the nail holes. And you know what Jesus did? He showed up and let him. After the service, I tried to slip out quietly, but Michael caught me in the lobby. First time here? He asked. I nodded. What brought you in? The honest answer, I died and met Jesus, and now I don't know what to do with my life, seemed too intense for a first conversation, so I just said, I'm trying to figure some things out. He smiled like he'd heard that before. Well, you're in the right place. Coffee hour is downstairs if you want to stick around. No pressure, but people are friendly. I almost left. Almost went home to my safe, controlled condo where I could process this alone. But something made me walk down those stairs to the church basement. The coffee was terrible. The cookies were store-bought. And the people were real. A woman named Janet introduced herself. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher, and within 5 minutes she'd told me about her son's addiction, her husband's death, and how God had carried her through both. I'm not saying it was easy, she said, stirring cream into her coffee. I'm saying it was possible. And some days, that's enough. I found myself telling her about the heart attack, about what I'd seen, about how everyone in my life thought I was losing my mind. Oh, honey, she said, putting her hand over mine. You're not losing your mind. You're finding your soul. But yeah, it's going to cost you. It always does. She was right. Marcus filed for separation 2 months later. We were having dinner, or trying to. I'd made his favorite pasta dish, attempting to recreate some normalcy. But the distance between us had become a chasm. I can't do this anymore, he said, setting down his fork. You're not the person I married. I'm exactly the person you married, I said. I'm just awake now. I can see things I couldn't see before. You see delusions, he said flatly. You had a traumatic medical event, and instead of processing it rationally, you've developed a religious fixation. Sarah, you're a scientist. Listen to yourself. I am listening to myself. For the first time in my life, I'm actually listening. He stood up, started pacing. You want to know what the partners at my firm are saying? They're asking if my wife is stable, if her episode reflects poorly on my judgment. Do you understand what this is doing to my career? Something in his words cut through the sadness. Your career? Marcus, I died. I met God. My entire understanding of reality has been turned upside down. And you're worried about what your partners think? At least I'm living in reality. Are you? I stood up too, facing him across the dinner table. Is this reality? This carefully constructed life where we work 80 hours a week and call it success, where we measure worth by titles and salaries? Where the biggest question we ever ask is what wine pairs with salmon. That's not fair. It's absolutely fair. We were sleepwalking Marcus, both of us, and I woke up. Then I guess I'll keep sleeping, he said, because I don't recognize the person you've become. He moved out that weekend. I thought it would destroy me. 8 years together, gone. But what I felt instead was sadness mixed with something like relief, like I'd been holding my breath for months and could finally exhale. Work was its own kind of battlefield. I returned to the hospital 6 months after the heart attack, cleared by cardiology, physically ready. But the moment I walked into the surgical wing, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes. The whispers followed me everywhere. Did you hear what she's been saying? She found Jesus. Poor thing, the heart attack must have affected her brain. Dr. Harrison called me into his office my second week back. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Okay. Are you mentally fit to perform surgery? The question shouldn't have shocked me, but it did. You've seen my psych evaluation. I passed with flying colors. The psych eval doesn't ask about religious conversion experiences. Since when is faith a mental illness? He sighed, rubbed his temples. It's not. But you're claiming you died and met Jesus, you're attending church, you're reading the Bible in the break room. People are concerned. People, I said, or you? Sarah, I've known you for 10 years. You were the most rational, evidence-based surgeon on my staff. And now you're talking about things that can't be proven, can't be measured, can't be replicated in a lab. Some things can't be measured, I said quietly. That doesn't make them less real. He looked at me for a long moment. I'm not taking you off the schedule, but I am watching. One mistake, one moment of hesitation because you're praying instead of acting, and we're having a different conversation. Fair enough, I said. But here's what I didn't tell him. I was praying more than ever. Before every surgery. During every surgery. Not instead of using my skills, but asking God to work through them. And something strange started happening. My hands were steadier. My instincts sharper. In moments of crisis, when the textbook answer wasn't enough, I'd feel this guidance. Like someone was showing me what to do. 3 months after I came back, I had a case that should have been impossible. A car accident victim, internal bleeding, pressure dropping, minutes from death. I was closing the bleeder when I saw it, a second rupture forming, hidden behind the liver. Something I shouldn't have been able to see from my angle. But I did see it, and I stopped it before it burst. The patient lived. In the scrub room afterward, Morrison looked at me with something like awe. How did you know that was there? I could have said intuition, experience, luck, but I told him the truth. I prayed, I said, and God showed me. Morrison didn't laugh. He didn't roll his eyes or make excuses to leave. He just nodded slowly and said, "Teach me." That was the beginning. Word spread quietly through the hospital. Not the gossip about crazy Dr. Chen who found religion. Something different. Whispers among the residents and nurses that if you wanted Dr. Chen on your case, you wanted her praying. The statistics backed it up. My complication rates dropped. My patient outcomes improved. I wasn't a better surgeon than I'd been before. I was the same surgeon, just no longer trying to do it alone. But not everyone was happy about it. Dr. Reynolds, chief of surgery, called me into his office 6 months after my return. He was old school, the kind of surgeon who believed in skill and statistics and nothing else. Chen, we need to talk about boundaries. Sir? I've had complaints. You're praying with patients before surgery. Only if they ask me to, I said, or if they want me to. It's inappropriate. You're a surgeon, not a chaplain. Keep your religion to yourself. I felt that old defiance rising, the same instinct that had made me a good surgeon, the refusal to back down when I knew I was right. With respect, sir, when a patient asks me if I believe in God, I'm not going to lie. Then refer them to the hospital chaplain. Is there a rule against surgeons having faith? There's a rule against proselytizing to vulnerable patients. I'm not proselytizing. I'm answering honestly when people ask me how I have peace before a difficult surgery, how I sleep at night after losing a patient, how I keep going when the statistics say someone won't make it. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, studying me. You've changed, Chen, and I'm not sure it's for the better. I've changed, I agreed, but my patient outcomes speak for themselves. My hands are steady, my judgment is sound, and if my faith makes me a better doctor because I'm not playing God anymore, just partnering with him, then I'm okay with that. He dismissed me without another word, but the message was clear. I was being watched. The hardest part wasn't the professional pushback. It was the loneliness. Marcus and I finalized our divorce a year after my heart attack. He'd already moved on, dating a junior partner at his firm who shared his worldview and his ambitions. I was happy for him, genuinely. We'd wanted different things, it turned out. He wanted a life he could control. I wanted a life surrendered to something bigger. My parents didn't understand either. I flew home to San Francisco for Thanksgiving, hoping to bridge the gap. It went about as well as you'd expect. "So this is a phase then?" my mother asked over turkey. "Something you needed to process the trauma?" "It's not a phase, Mom. It's who I am now." My father set down his wine glass carefully. "Sarah, you're an intelligent woman. Surely you recognize the psychological mechanisms at play here? Trauma response, need for meaning, fear of mortality." "I know all the psychological explanations, Dad. I've read the studies, I understand the neuroscience of near-death experiences, but none of that changes what I experienced, which was a dying brain creating comforting hallucinations. Or a dying brain finally able to perceive what's been real all along." The silence that followed was heavy. "We raised you better than this," my mother said quietly. And there it was, the thing I'd been afraid of my whole life. Disappointing them, failing to live up to the rational, evidence-based worldview they'd given me. But I wasn't 8 years old anymore, desperately seeking their approval. "You raised me to seek truth," I said, "and I found it, just not where any of us expected." I flew back to Chicago the next morning. But here's what I was learning. Losing people who can't accept who you've become makes room for people who can. The small church became my family. Janet, who'd lost her husband, Pastor Michael, who'd walked away from a law career to follow God's call, Tom and Linda, the elderly couple who led the prayer ministry, Marcus, a former gang member who had found Christ in prison and now ran a youth outreach program. These weren't perfect people with perfect lives. They were broken people being put back together by a God who specializes in redemption. And slowly, carefully, I told them my story. The whole thing. The heart attack, the hallway of light, meeting Jesus, coming back changed. "So what now?" Pastor Michael asked one evening. We were sitting in his office after a particularly difficult day at the hospital. "You've had this incredible encounter with God. You've walked away from your old life. What's he calling you to do with it?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Keep doing surgery? Keep praying for patients?" "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe there's something more." He pulled out a brochure, a medical missions organization that sent surgical teams to underserved areas, Guatemala, Uganda, Cambodia. "You have skills that could save lives in places where there are no hospitals, no surgeons, no hope. What if that's why God sent you back? Not just to work at Presbyterian, but to take what you know to people who have nothing?" The idea terrified me. Leave my comfortable job, my condo, my career track? But it also made something in my spirit leap. "Think about it," Michael said. "Pray about it. See what God says." I did pray about it. For weeks, and the answer kept coming back the same. Go. Not forever, not right away. But go. So I applied for a short-term surgical mission to Guatemala, 3 weeks in a rural clinic operating on patients who'd been on waiting lists for years, cleft palates, hernias, tumors that had been growing unchecked. When I told Dr. Reynolds I was taking 3 weeks of unpaid leave for a mission trip, he looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. "You're going to throw away your career for this?" "I'm not throwing away my career," I said. "I'm using it the way it was meant to be used." 3 months later, I was on a plane to Guatemala City with a team of Christian doctors, nurses, and anesthesiologists. And that's where everything changed again. The clinic in rural Guatemala was nothing like Presbyterian Hospital. No gleaming surgical suites, no state-of-the-art equipment. We operated in a converted school building with generators that failed twice a day and water that had to be boiled before we could use it for irrigation. Our first patient was a 6-year-old girl named Maria. She'd been born with a severe cleft lip and palate. Her family had saved for 3 years to afford the bus fare to bring her to our clinic. Her mother knelt in front of me, took my hands, and said something in Spanish. Our translator, a local pastor named Carlos, interpreted, "She says God sent you here. She's been praying for 3 years for a surgeon to come." 3 years of prayer. For me. A surgeon who'd spent most of her life not believing in the God who was supposedly sending her. The weight of that moment nearly crushed me. "Tell her," I said to Carlos, my voice shaking, "that God heard her prayers and I'm honored to be the answer." The surgery took 4 hours. Every moment, I was aware that this wasn't just medicine, it was ministry. This little girl would be able to smile for the first time, eat without difficulty, go to school without being mocked. When Maria woke up and saw her face in the mirror, saw her mother crying tears of joy, she said one word: "Gracias." Thank you, but I was the one who should have been saying thank you. Over those 3 weeks, I operated on 43 patients. Cleft lips, hernias that had been causing pain for decades, tumors that had grown so large they were visible through clothing. Each surgery was technically challenging with our limited equipment. Each one was also a reminder of why I'd been sent back. This was the work. Not just the cutting and suturing. The prayers before surgery with patients who had more faith in their pinkies than I'd had in my entire body before I died. The moments of holding hands with mothers who'd carried their sick children for miles on dirt roads because they believed God would provide. One night, halfway through the trip, I couldn't sleep. I walked out onto the small porch of our housing facility and looked up at the stars. They were brighter here, away from city lights, impossible to count. I thought about the hallway of light, about Jesus telling me my time wasn't finished, about all the years I'd wasted being so sure I had all the answers. "I'm sorry," I whispered to the stars, to God, to Jesus, who I now knew was listening. "I'm sorry I was so blind, so arrogant, so certain that I knew better than you." The night was quiet except for crickets and distant dogs barking, and then I felt it. That same presence from the hallway of light. Not visible, not audible, but unmistakably there. Peace washed over me like a wave. "You're forgiven," I heard in my spirit. Not with my ears, but with something deeper. "You were always forgiven. Now go and help others see." I cried on that porch for an hour. Not sad tears, grateful tears, humbled tears. When I got back to Chicago, I wasn't the same person who'd left. Dr. Reynolds called me into his office my first day back. I braced myself for another lecture about boundaries and professionalism. "I've been getting emails," he said without preamble. Here it comes, I thought. Complaints about my faith, demands that I keep religion separate from medicine. "From Guatemala," he continued, "from the clinic director. He says you are the best surgeon they've had in 15 years of running medical missions. Says you trained their local staff, worked longer hours than anyone else, prayed with every single family." I wasn't sure where this was going. Reynolds leaned forward. "He also sent me your complication rates. 0 post-op infections, 0 complications, in a rural clinic with limited resources. That's remarkable, Chen." "I had a good team," I said carefully. "You had God, apparently." He said it without mockery, almost with curiosity. "Look, I don't understand what happened to you. I still think there are perfectly rational explanations for your near-death experience. But I can't argue with results." He pulled out a folder. "I'm recommending you for the teaching faculty. We need surgeons who can handle high-pressure situations with limited resources. And whatever you're doing, praying, meditating, communing with the universe, I don't care. It's working." I stared at him, stunned. "Don't look so shocked," he said with the ghost of a smile. "I'm a scientist. I follow the data, and the data says you're one of the best surgeons in this hospital. Whether that's because of faith or in spite of it, I honestly don't know. But I'd be an idiot to ignore it." Teaching changed everything. I had residents following me on rounds, watching my technique, asking questions, And inevitably, someone would ask about the change in me, about the peace I had going into difficult surgeries, about how I handled it when we lost patients. I started being honest, not preachy, not pushy, just honest. I died once, I'd say. And when I came back, I realized I'd been living in black and white my whole life. Now I see in color. That changes how you approach everything. Some residents thought I was crazy, but some started asking deeper questions. Dr. Morrison was one of them, the resident who'd taken over Tyler's surgery while I was dying on the floor. "What did you see?" he asked me one day in the scrub room, his voice quiet. "When you died. What was it really like?" So I told him, the hallway of light. The presence of overwhelming love. Meeting Jesus, the peace that surpassed understanding. "I'm terrified of death," he admitted. "I'm a surgeon, and I'm terrified of the one thing I can't control." "I was too," I said, until I realized death isn't the end. It's a doorway. And there's someone on the other side who loves us more than we can possibly imagine. Morrison started coming to church with me. Then his wife joined. Then they both started bringing questions about faith, about suffering, about how a good God could allow pain. I didn't have all the answers, but I had my story. And sometimes that was enough. That was 2 years ago. 2 years since my heart stopped beating on an operating room floor. 2 years since I met Jesus in a hallway made of light. 2 years since I came back to a world that suddenly made sense in ways it never had before. My life looks different now. I'm still a trauma surgeon at Presbyterian Hospital. I still scrub in, still make incisions, still fight to save lives in those desperate moments between injury and death. But I'm not fighting alone anymore. I pray before every surgery now. Sometimes out loud, with patients who ask for it. Sometimes silently as I wash my hands in the scrub room. Every single time I feel that presence. The same one I met when I died. Jesus, he's right there with me, guiding my hands, giving me peace, reminding me that I'm not playing God, I'm partnering with him. The professional cost? It's been real. Some colleagues still think I had a psychotic break. My ex-husband moved on with someone who shares his rational, controllable worldview. My parents and I have an uneasy truce where we don't talk about faith. But the gain? Immeasurable. I've been on 5 more medical missions: Guatemala, Uganda, Honduras, and twice to Cambodia. I've operated on hundreds of patients who had no other hope. I've trained local doctors in rural clinics. I've prayed with mothers who walked for days to bring their children to our makeshift surgical suites. And I've watched God show up. Every single time. Here at Presbyterian, I'm now the director of surgical education. I teach residents not just the technical skills of surgery, but something I wish someone had taught me: that medicine is as much about the soul as it is about the body. That we're not just fixing broken parts. We're caring for whole human beings who are loved infinitely by a God who knows every cell in their bodies. Some of my students think I'm brilliant. Some think I'm crazy. But a precious few, have started asking the questions I wish I'd asked 30 years earlier. What if there's more? What if death isn't the end? What if the universe isn't random and meaningless, but purposeful and designed by a God who loves us? Morrison was baptized 6 months ago. He and his wife are raising their daughter in the faith they're discovering together. When he told me, he said, "You dying saved my life." But it wasn't me. It was never me. It was Jesus. Using the worst moment of my life to crack open everything I thought I knew and show me the truth I'd been running from since I was 8 years old. Here's what I want you to understand. I was so sure, so absolutely certain that death was the end, that faith was delusion, that anyone who believed in God was weak or foolish or afraid of reality. I was wrong about all of it. And if I could go back to that operating room floor, if I could choose whether or not to have that heart attack, to die for 7 minutes, to lose my marriage and my certainty and my carefully controlled life, I'd choose it again, without hesitation. Because what I found on the other side of death was more real, more true, more beautiful than anything I'd known in 37 years of living. I found love that knows every dark corner of who I am and loves me anyway. I found purpose bigger than my career or my achievements. I found peace in the face of death. not because I'm brave, but because I know death is just a doorway home. And I found Jesus. Not the religious caricature I dismissed my whole life, not a myth or a crutch or wish fulfillment, but Jesus himself, real, alive, present, the one who was there in that hallway of light, who's been there in every surgery since, who was there even in all those years I denied he existed. He was always there. I was just too blind to see him. So here's my question for you, the one watching this right now. What if you're wrong? What if everything you think you know about death, about meaning, about God, what if it's not the whole story? I'm not asking you to abandon reason. I'm a surgeon. I believe in science and evidence and the scientific method. But I'm also living proof that there are realities science can't measure, truths that exist beyond what we can see in a microscope or prove in a lab. If you're watching this and you're where I was, successful, certain, in control, but somehow empty underneath it all, I want you to know there's more. So much more. If you've experienced loss or tragedy or suffering and you're wondering where God is in the pain, he's there. I promise you he's there. Even when you can't see him, even when it feels like darkness, he's there. And if you're curious, if something in this story has stirred something in you that you can't quite explain, don't ignore it. I ignored that stirring for 37 years, and then I had to die to finally pay attention. You don't have to wait that long. Find a church. Open a Bible. Start with the book of John just like I did. Pray even if you don't know if anyone's listening. Say, Jesus, if you're real, show me. He will. Maybe not the way he showed me, maybe not dramatically, but he will. Because here's what I learned in that hallway of light. He's been waiting for you your whole life, arms open, ready to show you that death is not the end, that your life has purpose, that you are loved beyond measure. All you have to do is stop running and turn around. He's already there. He's always been there. And if a stubborn atheist trauma surgeon can find him, anyone can. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I died for 7 minutes, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me.